This means the human being is not born with the power to attract evil, but rather with good and positive things, which is entirely in accordance with the creational laws, namely that every life form shall be born unencumbered by evil or destructive aggressiveness or Gewalt. Therefore, it is the truth that human beings are born into the world with a good and positive social behavior and are controlled by this, which is something that happens long before they are in any way aware of it. This is the same thing as saying that every human being who possesses Gewalt, evil, aggression and degeneracies of any kind is himself or herself to blame for this, because he or she learned this entirely by himself or herself during the course of his or her childhood or adult life. No human being is Gewalt acting by nature. He or she learns to be Gewalt acting because of his or her surroundings, from parents, brothers and sisters, relatives, friends, acquaintances and other human beings. Human beings also learn to be Gewalt acting as a result of religions and sects which teach murder and manslaughter as well as other evil Gewalt and bad things, from politicians and the military who order wars and spree death and destruction, and from the penal code according to which torture and the death penalty are imposed. Also, however, from Gewalt acting forms of sport, games and educational measures, etc. This means human beings learn about Gewalt from an early age. Indeed, not infrequently they almost imbibe it with their mother's milk, meaning that evil becomes seen as the only successful coping strategy in order to assert oneself against other people and the entire world around. This destructive aggressiveness, however, is not harmless because evil is fundamentally directed against its own origin as well, as can be seen by the fact that evil of any kind makes for unhappiness over time even if the human being is not punished for his or her Gewalt acting or otherwise evil actions. Yet it is the reality that an individual will come to harm sooner or later through having done evil, because psychic stability weakens over time due to the pangs of a guilty conscience. This does not apply to human beings who have become entirely brutalized and callous as well as irresponsible and unscrupulous, something which also applies to those who kill as legal executioners or soldiers, knowing the judicial or military command is at their back and incorrectly believing that their actions are rightful, which means that they do not develop a guilty conscience. It is the norm for doing evil irrespective of what kind that a guilty conscience will surface in a human being over time, therefore undermining the psychic stability. This psychic destabilization leads to severe depression, to an increased risk of suicide and the danger of becoming addicted to medicines, drugs and alcohol. It is a fact that amongst human beings who have learned to do evil and have fallen into this trap, the percentage of suicides, addictions and depressions is 530 times greater than in human beings who have not lapsed into evil. This also applies if the deeds have never been investigated and the wrongdoers have never been consequently punished. If a human being does not recognize that his or her evil actions are wrong and does not make an effort to return to the good and right path, and to remain walking on this path henceforth, something which is well within the bounds of possibility for every fallible human being, then that person is running headlong into their own doom. Taking a more precise look at the evil that human beings do, it is apparent that the evil contains something like a midpoint in the entire thing, a half-life so to speak. As far as the person is concerned who is doing evil, whether it involves school attacks or criminal activities with regard to financial gain, the whole thing is concealed under a cloak of might from other human beings or under a cloak of rapid enrichment. And yet everything will at some time reach its high point, a midpoint or, as was mentioned, a half-life, from which point things start to go downhill or at which point a process of self-dissolution begins. Energy tails off and psychic stability begins to fluctuate with the pangs of conscience. This is the time when energy for the good must once more come to the fore. Human beings must once again be creational, constructive and loving of fairness, because the true energy of life does not tolerate sheer egoism in the long run. For many of those who have learned evilly and lived accordingly in their life, the time for learning and practicing good in accordance with creational laws and recommendations, as well as practicing constructive and fairness-loving things, may occur during the course of their current life, whereas for others this moment for living a good life comes too late, namely when the Grim Reaper is already at the door. Although a sense of fairness is anchored in the human brain even before birth, it has to be nourished and cherished in order to bring it to the fore. This nourishing and cherishing is of enormous importance, especially when the environment exerts its influence, since it is true that goodness depends on the firm volition of the human being as well as on whether he or she allows himself or herself to be influenced by his or her environment or not. This means the human being himself or herself must have a sense of goodness, nourishing and cherishing it, and not leaving it up to the environment, because the direct or indirect environment interprets the sense of goodness according to its own rules and discretion, understanding and benefit. Good and evil are always connected to praise or punishment, in which case the question arises in particular with regard to punishment of how much punishment the human being needs if he or she has done something evil, and whether the punishment helps to turn the evil in the human being to the good. Precisely. Here it can be said that many punishments imposed on fallible people result in precisely the opposite effect or even in disadvantages, and trigger thoughts of revenge, hatred and retribution instead of achieving a turning to the good. The reason is that punishments only function and fallible people only turn to a better and good form of behavior if the punishments are also accepted by the fallible ones, recognized as correct, and are also understood as a means to a good end. This fact restricts the utility of the punishment to an enormous extent, simply because rules and punishments only bring a benefit if the fallible ones have accepted them and accept the rules and punishments on themselves in order to act in a fair, gewaltless and honest way. Only in this way are rules and punishments useful and establish important preconditions for economic growth, innovation, commercial and social success, as well as for technical, medical and scientific progress, including progress in wisdom, love, peace, freedom, harmony and consciousness-related evolution. Semyasa Silver Star Center, 27 July 2008. Billy. What the truth knows to say respect or venerability for the entirety of nature and for creation and its laws and recommendations must be the determining factors in how human beings think, feel and act. Human beings must live in harmony with creation, with nature, with earth and the universe, as well as with all varieties of present existence that spring forth from these. Rivers, stones, plants, animals, lakes, seas, brooks, springs, the air and water, trees and bushes and everything that crawls and flies here on earth are life forms with a spirit form, with very many of them being connected by physical vibrations. All of them are beings that communicate with one another, all knowing about their common existence amongst one another. The consciousness and psyche of all creatures are in turn bound on a journey through time, incorporating very many bodily existences, through the innumerable forms in which life appears. In this process, death is a passage to rebirth as well as the conversion into the other world, the world of pure spirit. This is the basis for the tightly woven and indissoluble web of all life, and in this way no form of life strives to rise up over the others within their group and to set themselves up over the others, because each life form contains a basic goodness and not evil. After all, evil is learned and practiced as a result of inappropriate doings and degeneracy. Fundamentally, the creational laws and recommendations impose cooperation on all life forms, according to which every individual must see itself as a valuable component of the whole in all existence of creation, and this also applies to every political and religious, ideological and philosophical orientation, as well as to Earth and the entire universe created in accordance with a creational plan.